Millionaire rescues a beautiful woman with a baby on the street, takes them to his house, but upon seeing her in the bath, he is paralyzed and discovers a shocking secret. This story will touch you. Tell me in the comments, do you believe in fate? Leave your comment and follow this beautiful story now. The rain was harshly battering the asphalt, creating bright puddles under the yellowed streetlights. Nathaniel Anderson, sitting in the back seat of his luxurious sedan, was tapping, his fingers impatiently on the soft leather of the seat. The traffic was unbearable, a sea of blinking red lights in the jam. He was in a hurry, but he didn't know exactly why. The life of a 47-year-old millionaire was filled with empty urgencies, meetings, investments, social events. Everything seemed essential, but nothing truly fulfilled him. It was then that he saw her. On the soaked sidewalk, a woman was holding a small baby against her chest, huddled under a broken awning. Her dark hair was stuck to her wet face, and her arms wrapped around the child as if they were the last barrier against the biting cold of the night. Nathaniel frowned. Something about the scene deeply unsettled him. "Driver, stop the car." The driver, a middle-aged man who had worked for him for years, cast him an uncertain look through the rearview mirror. "Sir, the traffic is bad. If we stop now, it will be hard to get out of here. I said to stop." Nathaniel's tone admitted no argument. The car slowly pulled over to the sidewalk, and he got out, feeling immediately the cold water drip down the collar of his expensive shirt. Ignoring the discomfort, he approached the woman. She had her head down, shivering. "Miss, are you okay?" She looked up, and Nathaniel felt a slight tightening in his chest. There was something intense in her gaze. It was not just fatigue or cold. It was fear. I'm just waiting for the rain to pass," she said, her voice trembling. The baby whined quietly, pressing its little face against its mother's chest. Nathaniel then noticed that the child was wrapped in a blanket far too thin for the weather. "Do you have anywhere to go?" She hesitated for a second, but then shook her head. In denial. "No," she admitted, averting her gaze, "but I will find a place." Nathaniel knew what that meant. She had no one, no roof, no food. Probably not even a plan. He looked at the child, who was now with closed eyes, and felt a knot in his stomach. He was not a man of impulses. On the contrary, his entire life had been built on calculated decisions. But in that moment, something inside him screamed to act. "Get in the car," he said. The woman looked at him suspicious. "I can't." "You can. And you must. I don't know your story, but that child needs a safe place. So do you." She pressed her lips together, looking from Nathaniel to the car. He knew she was scared. A stranger offering help in the middle of the night. It was understandable, but he did not intend to give up so easily. "I won't hurt you," he assured. "I just want to help." A long silence followed. The rain fell harder, and the woman shivered again. The baby stirred, restless, and she finally made a decision. "All right." Nathaniel helped her into the car, and soon they were pulling away from the chaotic traffic. During the drive, he noticed that the woman held the child even tighter, as if afraid he would snatch it away from her arms. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to ease the tension. She took a few seconds to respond. "Madison Bailey." "And the little one?" She looked at the baby and gently stroked his forehead. "Daniel Mitchell." Nathaniel nodded, watching her out of the corner of his eye. Now that they were inside the car, he could see her face better. Even with the pallor caused by the cold and fatigue, Madison was incredibly beautiful. Her features were delicate, and her eyes were large and expressive. But there was something more there, a deep sadness, a story he still did not know. "You don't have to tell me anything now," he said gently, "but if you need help, Anything, let me know." Madison did not immediately respond. She just looked out the window, watching the city rush by in luminous blur. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Nathaniel took a deep breath. The truth was, he didn't know. Because no one deserves to be in the rain holding a baby, not knowing where to go. Madison looked away, but Nathaniel noticed a glimmer in her eyes. She blinked quickly, as if trying to hold back tears. Shortly after, the car stopped in front of Nathaniel's mansion. He got out first and opened the door for Madison. She stepped out hesitantly, holding Daniel Mitchell even tighter upon seeing the size of the property. "You live here?" she asked, amazed. "Yes, let's go inside." Madison seemed to hesitate once more, but as she looked at little Daniel Mitchell, sleeping in her arms, she took a deep breath and followed Nathaniel into the mansion. She had no idea that this decision would change her life forever. Madison Bailey entered Nathaniel Anderson's mansion hesitantly, holding Daniel Mitchell tightly against her chest. Her eyes widened at the luxury of the surroundings. The marble floor shone under the warm light of the crystal chandeliers, and the elegant, perfectly arranged furniture exuded sophistication. Everything there seemed to come from a completely different world than the one she knew. Nathaniel closed the door behind her and took off his wet jacket, handing it to a staff member who appeared discreetly. He noticed Madison's lost gaze and tried to soften the moment. "Make yourself at home. It's safe here." Madison nodded, still speechless. She felt her body cold and her muscles tense after so many hours on the street. She was exhausted, but her survival instinct kept her from fully relaxing. Nathaniel noticed her restlessness and gestured toward a soft leather sofa. "Sit down, Madison, you must be tired." She hesitated for a second before carefully settling down, adjusting Daniel on her lap. The baby, now warmed, breathed peacefully, which brought a small relief to her heart. "I'll ask them to prepare something warm for you to eat," Nathaniel said, calling one of the household staff. "And also something for Daniel if he needs it." Madison looked at him with gratitude, but also with a mix of confusion and caution. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice coming out low, almost a whisper. Nathaniel sighed, sitting in a nearby armchair. "I don't know exactly," he replied honestly. "But when I saw you out there, something inside me told me I couldn't just leave." Madison bit her lip, thoughtful. Throughout her life, she had never received anything without a price. She always distrusted acts of kindness because she knew that most of the time there was a hidden intention. "I can't pay you for this," she said, keeping her voice firm. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment before responding. "I'm not expecting payment." Silence lingered between them, broken only by the soft snoring of Daniel. A few minutes later, a maid brought a tray with hot soup, fresh bread, and a glass of juice. The delicious smell made Madison's stomach churn. She couldn't even remember the last time she had eaten something decent. "You can eat," Nathaniel encouraged. She looked at the food, and for the first time that night, allowed herself a small relief. She took the spoon with trembling hands and began to sip the soup slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her body. With each spoonful, it felt like she was regaining a little of her strength. Nathaniel watched silently, intrigued. Who was this woman? What had led her to that state? He was not naturally a curious man, but he felt that Madison carried a story that needed to be told. After a few minutes, when Daniel wriggled restlessly in her lap, Nathaniel stood up. "I'll show you the room where you can rest." Madison stopped eating and looked at him suspiciously. "I can sleep here in the living room," she said quickly. "Of course not," Nathaniel replied without hesitation. "There are many empty rooms in this house. You can choose one of them." She opened her mouth to argue, but he was already grabbing a blanket to cover the baby. Madison sighed and followed him. They climbed a wide staircase to the second floor. The hallway was spacious, decorated with expensive paintings and soft lighting. Nathaniel stopped in front of a door and opened it. "This is one of the guest rooms." Madison entered cautiously. The room was huge, with a spacious bed, immaculate linens, and a comfortable armchair next to a window overlooking the garden. There was a private bathroom and a small crib in the corner. She turned to Nathaniel, incredulous. "You have a crib here?" He scratched his neck, somewhat awkwardly. "My sister sometimes brings her children here. I think no one has used this room since her last visit." Madison looked at Daniel and then at Nathaniel. Something inside her was beginning to soften, despite her resistance. "Thank you," she said, her voice laden with contained emotion. Nathaniel nodded. "Rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." Madison took a deep breath before murmuring a final good night. Nathaniel left and closed the door behind him, but it took him some time to walk away. Leaning against the hallway wall, he reflected on the strange feeling that had come over him since he first saw Madison. Something about her touched him in a way he still didn't understand, and it bothered him. Hours later, the early morning was quietly advancing. Nathaniel, already lying in his room, tossed and turned in bed. Sleep wouldn't come. He couldn't stop thinking about Madison and little Daniel. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? What had brought her to such a vulnerable state? After a long time staring at the ceiling, he sighed and got up. He put on a robe and decided to go downstairs for a glass of water. As he passed through the hallway, he noticed that the light in the guest room was on. He frowned. With silent steps, he approached the slightly open door and peeked discreetly inside. Madison was sitting on the bed, wearing a silk robe he had left for her. She seemed lost in thought, her eyes fixed on little Daniel, who was sound asleep in the crib. Nathaniel felt a tightness in his chest at seeing that scene. There was immense tenderness in the way she looked at her son. But there was also a shadow, something heavy, a secret she had not yet shared. Not wanting to invade her privacy, Nathaniel stepped back and went downstairs to the kitchen. As he drank the water, he couldn't shake the feeling that by welcoming Madison and Daniel into his home, his life was about to change in an irreversible way. And he didn't know if he was ready for that. The sun had barely begun to rise on the horizon when Nathaniel Anderson woke up. He had restless sleep, filled with thoughts about the woman and the baby who were now sleeping under his roof. Since he became a millionaire so many years ago, his life had been reduced to business, events, and superficial relationships. He couldn't remember the last time someone had sparked so much curiosity in him. Dressed in casual clothes, he went down the stairs. The mansion was silent, and he went straight to the kitchen, expecting to find only the maid preparing breakfast. But he found Madison Bailey. She was there, standing, holding Daniel Mitchell in her arms, while trying, not very successfully, to prepare something on the stove. Her expression was one of absolute concentration, and she didn't immediately notice Nathaniel's presence. When she did, she jumped slightly, holding the baby more securely. "Good morning," he said, keeping his voice low so as not to startle her any further. "Good morning," Madison replied, a bit embarrassed. Nathaniel looked at the pot on the stove and raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" She averted her gaze, looking a bit shy. "I saw that there are many people working here, but I don't want to be a burden. I thought I'd prepare something for myself and for Daniel." Nathaniel crossed his arms, analyzing her for a moment. The woman in front of him was proud, that was clear. He admired that. But he also noticed that her distrust was still there, as if she was used to not depending on anyone. "You don't need to worry about that," he said, picking up a cup and filling it with coffee. "I didn't bring you here expecting you to cook or do anything. I just want you to rest and recover." Madison lowered her eyes to Daniel, gently stroking her son's forehead before sighing. "I don't know how to handle this," she confessed. "No one has ever done something like this for me." Nathaniel noticed the sincerity in her voice. Madison was not the type to play the victim. On the contrary, she seemed to have carried the world on her shoulders for too long. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, indicating that she should do the same. Madison hesitated, but eventually settled in with Daniel on her lap. "If you want to tell me your story, I would like to hear it," Nathaniel said calmly, taking a sip of coffee. Madison remained silent for a long moment, her fingers instinctively smoothing the blanket that wrapped Daniel. Nathaniel did not pressure her. He knew that people carrying secrets needed time to trust. Finally, she let out a deep sigh. "I never knew my father," she began, not looking at him. "My mother died when I was still little. I was raised by an aunt who—" She stopped, biting her lip. "Who didn't want me around?" Nathaniel frowned but remained silent. "When I turned 16, I was forced to leave home. Since then, I lived as I could, working wherever I could, trying to keep myself afloat. When Daniel was born, everything got even harder." She paused and this time lifted her eyes to Nathaniel. He noticed that there was much more to her story than she was telling. "But I don't want to bother you with my story," Madison finished. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You're not bothering me." She held his gaze for a few moments, as if trying to decipher him. "Are you always like this?" she suddenly asked. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "A stranger who appears out of nowhere, helps a woman and a stranger baby, and welcomes them into his own home without asking for anything in return." He smiled slightly. "No, this is the first time." Madison seemed surprised by his answer. "Then why?" Nathaniel twirled the cup between his fingers, reflecting. "Because for some reason I felt that I should." Madison continued to look at him, as if searching for some hidden ulterior motive in his words, but she found none. Before she could respond, Daniel began to whimper, and Madison automatically rocked him gently, murmuring calming words to soothe him. Nathaniel watched that scene and felt something different within himself. "He seems to be a strong baby," he commented. Madison smiled for the first time. "He is." At that moment, Nathaniel realized something. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his house was full of truth. Madison and Daniel brought a new energy, something he hadn't realized he was missing until now. "You can stay as long as you need," he suddenly said. Madison tensed. "Nathaniel, I don't want to take advantage of your generosity. It's not taking advantage if I'm offering." Madison averted her gaze, clearly struggling with herself. But then something changed in her expression. A small crack in that barrier she insisted on keeping. "Thank you," she murmured. Nathaniel smiled slightly and nodded. "Now, let's have a real breakfast. And please, don't try to cook again," he joked, making Madison laugh for the first time. That laughter, however short it was, echoed in his mind. He didn't know what was happening, but he was sure of one thing. Madison and Daniel had entered his life for a reason, and he was willing to find out what it was. The days passed with a strange naturalness inside the mansion. Nathaniel Anderson, used to the monotonous and silent routine of his home, noticed that the environment had changed completely since the arrival of Madison Bailey and Daniel Mitchell. Now it was common to hear childish giggles echoing through the hallways, or the light footsteps of Madison exploring the rooms, always with the baby in her arms. Nathaniel Anderson was not sure what was happening to him. The truth was that he did not like mess nor surprises. His life had always been perfectly organized, and any deviation from his plans usually irritated him. But this time, their presence did not bother him. On the contrary, he felt good. It was a feeling he had not experienced in years. On a cool night, Nathaniel Anderson was on the porch of his house, enjoying a glass of whiskey and lost in thought. He liked this time of day when he could finally breathe without the pressure of business, meetings, and social commitments that meant nothing to him. It was then that he heard light footsteps behind him. "May I sit down?" Madison Bailey's soft voice broke the silence. Nathaniel Anderson turned and saw that she was holding a cup of tea in her hands. She was barefoot, wearing a thin robe that he had sent to buy for her. Her hair, loose and slightly messy, swayed gently with the night's breeze. He indicated the chair beside him. "Of course." Madison Bailey sat down and remained silent for a few moments, looking at the garden illuminated by the moonlight. "It's been a while since I've seen such a beautiful place," she commented, distracted. Nathaniel Anderson smiled slightly. "Where did you live before?" She hesitated for a moment before responding. "Actually, in several places. I never had a fixed home. I've always moved from one place to another, looking for work, trying to survive." Nathaniel Anderson noticed that she spoke with a neutral tone, but her eyes carried a deep melancholy. "It must have been difficult," he said, without sounding pitying, just as a statement. Madison Bailey gave a small smile without humor. "I got used to it." Nathaniel Anderson took a sip of his whiskey before asking, "And Daniel Mitchell's father?" Madison Bailey immediately averted her gaze, and he realized that it was a wound that had not yet healed. "He never wanted to be a father," she replied in a low voice. "When he found out about the pregnancy, he simply disappeared." Nathaniel Anderson felt a silent anger grow within him. "A coward," he commented bluntly. Madison Bailey let out a short laugh. "Yes, but in the end, it was better this way. At least I know Daniel Mitchell won't have to deal with someone who never wanted him." Nathaniel Anderson did not respond. He simply watched her as she brought the cup to her lips, blowing on the tea before taking a sip. "And you?" Madison Bailey asked, looking at him. "You've never been married?" Nathaniel Anderson let out a sigh. "No, I've had relationships, but nothing lasting." "Why?" He gave a half smile. "I guess I never found someone who really made me want to stay." Madison Bailey frowned, intrigued. "And what would make you want to stay?" The question caught Nathaniel Anderson off guard. He remained silent for a few moments, reflecting. "I don't know," he replied sincerely. "Maybe someone who made me feel that being with her is more important than anything else." Madison Bailey held his gaze for a moment. There was something different between them now, a kind of connection that did not exist before. Finally, she averted her eyes and smiled slightly. "It seems you are demanding." Nathaniel Anderson laughed. "Maybe." The silence that settled between them was not uncomfortable. On the contrary, it was as if they were both beginning to understand something they still did not have the courage to admit. At that moment, Nathaniel Anderson knew that his life would never be the same. Days later. With each passing day, Nathaniel Anderson found himself more involved with Madison Bailey and Daniel Mitchell. He made a point of spending time with the two, making up excuses to be around. Madison Bailey also seemed more at ease, smiling more, talking more. And then, something unexpected happened. It was a hot afternoon, and Nathaniel Anderson was leaving his office when he heard the sound of laughter coming from the living room. He followed the sound and found Madison Bailey on the carpet, playing with Daniel Mitchell. The baby was laughing. As she tickled his little belly, Nathaniel Anderson stood still in the doorway, watching the scene without being noticed. His heart raced in a strange way. Something inside him warmed. Unaware, he smiled. "What's going on here?" he asked, entering the room. Madison Bailey looked at him with a sparkle in her eyes. "We're having fun, which seems to be something rare in this house." Nathaniel Anderson laughed. "So, my house was very serious before your arrival." Madison Bailey pretended to think. For sure. But don't worry, Daniel Mitchell and I are fixing that. Nathaniel Anderson sat down beside them, and Daniel Mitchell immediately tried to grab his hand. He carefully took the baby, and to his surprise, the little one let out a laugh and leaned his head against his chest. Madison Bailey observed the scene with a different look. "He likes you," she said softly. Nathaniel Anderson felt a tightness in his chest. He had never had much contact with children, but Daniel Mitchell made something inside him soften. And Madison Bailey, he looked at her and realized he also liked being near her more than he would like to admit. At that moment, Nathaniel Anderson realized he was in trouble. Not because Madison Bailey was a stranger he had welcomed without knowing her complete story, but because, for the first time in his life, he was beginning to feel something he could not control, and that scared him. The routine in the mansion had changed completely. If silence had previously reigned supreme, now the sound of children's laughter and casual conversations filled the rooms. Nathaniel Anderson was no longer bothered by it. On the contrary, he was beginning to feel that this noise was exactly what was missing in his life. But there was something more. Something he refused to admit. Madison Bailey. Since she arrived, something inside him had changed. He watched her from afar, trying to understand what was happening to himself. The way she smiled at Daniel Mitchell. The way she walked through the house, her soft voice when speaking. Everything in him seemed to turn toward her in a way that had never happened before. And it left him restless. One day, Nathaniel Anderson decided to leave the office early and return home without warning. He wanted to surprise Daniel Mitchell with a gift, a small toy car he had bought on the way. When he entered the mansion, he expected to find the maid or hear the laughter of Madison Bailey and the baby, but he found something different. Madison Bailey was in the garden, sitting on the grass with Daniel Mitchell by her side, while a gentle breeze tousled her hair. But it was not that which caught Nathaniel Anderson's attention. She was crying. It was a silent, discreet cry, as if she were trying to hide from the world. Her face was turned down, and one of her hands covered part of her face. Nathaniel Anderson felt something tighten inside him. Without thinking twice, he walked over to her. "Madison?" She startled, quickly wiping her eyes before looking at him. "Nathaniel, you're back." He lowered himself beside her, ignoring the grass that could stain his expensive pants. "What happened?" Madison Bailey took a deep breath, clearly, trying to control her emotion. "Nothing, I'm just a bit sensitive today." Nathaniel did not believe her for a second. "Madison, tell me the truth." She looked at him, and for the first time, Nathaniel Anderson saw something beyond the strength she always demonstrated. He saw exhaustion, pain. "I was just thinking about everything I've been through so far," she said finally. "The days I slept on the street, the moments when I thought I wouldn't be able to feed Daniel Mitchell." She paused for a moment, running her fingers through her son's hair, who was innocently playing with the hem of her dress. "And then I look at where I am now, in this house, with you helping us, and I can't believe all of this is real." Nathaniel Anderson swallowed hard. "But it is real," she sighed, looking at him. "And what if I wake up tomorrow and all of this is over?" Nathaniel felt a slight discomfort with that question, not because she doubted him, but because he knew exactly how she felt. He had never trusted people easily. He knew life could turn upside down without warning, and he didn't want Madison to feel that insecurity. "That won't happen," he said firmly. Madison held his gaze for a moment. Nathaniel Anderson realized she was trying to believe his words, but years of suffering had made her distrust any promise. Unconsciously, Nathaniel brought his hand to hers and held it. It was a simple gesture, but powerful. Madison did not pull away. On the contrary, she gently squeezed his hand, as if she needed that certainty. "I promise," Nathaniel whispered. That night, Nathaniel found himself thinking of Madison Bailey more than he should have. He tried to shift his mind to other subjects, but the image of her crying in the garden wouldn't leave his head. He decided to take a shower to relax. Upon leaving his room and crossing the hallway, he passed by the slightly open door of the guest room. Something caught his attention. The sound of water running from the shower. Madison was taking a shower. He considered looking away, continuing on his path, respecting her privacy. But before he could do so, something unexpected happened. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and for a brief moment he caught a glimpse of Madison from behind, with wet skin glistening under the bathroom light. Nathaniel felt his body freeze. He should have left right then. But before he could, his eyes caught something that made him widen in shock, a scar. It was large and marked her skin at the level of her back, as if it had been caused by something deep. Nathaniel felt the air escape from his lungs. What could have caused such a scar? He looked away and left the room immediately, his heart racing. Upon entering his own room, he threw himself onto the armchair, his mind racing. Madison carried a secret, something that had hurt her deeply, and Nathaniel knew he needed to discover what it was, because at that moment he realized he was already too involved to simply ignore. Nathaniel Anderson didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, his eyes fixed on the dark ceiling, while his mind spun non-stop. The image of Madison Bailey in the shower, water gliding down her skin, the striking scar that crossed her back. All of this tormented him. That wasn't just any mark. It was large, deep. It didn't seem like a mere accident. Something inside him screamed that scar carried a story Madison Bailey didn't want to tell. And now Nathaniel wanted to know, but at the same time, he didn't want her to know that he had seen it. He got up early, unable to stay still. He took a long shower, got dressed, and went down to the dining room. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air, mixed with the aroma of warm bread. When he reached the table, Madison was already there, wearing a simple yet elegant dress, with her hair down and a small smile as she fed Daniel Mitchell. Nathaniel stopped for a second, just observing the scene. She looked so calm, as if she was beginning to feel at home, but he knew there was so much more behind that smile. "Good morning," she said, looking at him naturally. "Good morning," he replied, sitting down at the table. For a moment he just watched her, trying to find a way to touch on the subject without scaring her, but Madison sensed that he was different. "Are you all right?" she asked, frowning. Nathaniel hesitated, but then let out a sigh. "Actually, I've been thinking." Madison continued looking at him, waiting for him to continue. "About you," he said finally. She blinked a few times, as if she didn't know how to respond. "About me?" Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Madison, ever since you arrived, I've been trying to understand you, your story, your strength. But I feel like there's something you haven't told me." She tensed up, her fingers lightly tightened around the spoon in Daniel's porridge bowl. "Nathaniel," she murmured, looking away. "I'm not pressuring you," he said, softening his tone. "I just want you to know that if you need to talk about something, I'm here." Madison bit her lower lip. For a moment, he thought she was going to say something, that she would finally reveal what she was hiding, but then she just forced a smile. "I'm fine, Nathaniel. I've been through a lot, but I'm okay now." Nathaniel watched her for a few seconds. She was lying, or at least omitting the truth. But he knew he couldn't force her, so he just nodded. "If you ever want to talk, I'll be here." Madison relaxed a little and smiled genuinely this time. "Thank you." Nathaniel looked away at Daniel, who was now playing with his mother's fingers. Even though Madison wasn't ready to tell her story, he knew that Scar spoke more than her words, and he wouldn't rest until he discovered the truth. The next few days passed quickly. Madison continued to adapt to the new routine, and Nathaniel worked hard not to pressure her. But the truth was that every day he became more intrigued by that woman, and more involved. One night, he was in the office reviewing some documents when he heard soft knocks on the door. "Come in," he said without looking away from the paper. Madison entered wearing a satin robe, her hair damp, as if she had just taken a shower. Nathaniel lifted his eyes and felt an unexpected warmth rise through his body. She looked different, more at ease. "Hi," she said a bit hesitantly. "Hi," he replied, closing the folder of documents. "Did something happen?" Madison took a deep breath before replying. "Actually, I just wanted to talk." Nathaniel gestured to the armchair in front of him, and she sat down slowly. "About what?" Madison was silent for a moment, fiddling with the end of her robe. "About me," she finally said. Nathaniel leaned forward, attentive. "I'm listening." She lowered her eyes, taking a deep breath before starting. "I've told you that I was raised by an aunt, but I didn't tell you how it was." Nathaniel remained silent, giving her space to continue. "She didn't want me. Treated me like a burden. When I turned 16, she kicked me out of the house with nothing. No money, no clothes, no place to go." Nathaniel felt a silent anger grow inside him. "I spent years surviving. I worked in awful places, suffered abuse, was humiliated. But I kept going. I had no other choice." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "But the worst part came when I met Daniel Mitchell's father." Nathaniel tensed up. Madison laughed without humor. "At first I thought he was different. He promised me so many things, said he loved me. But as soon as I got pregnant, he changed, became violent, controlling." She took a deep breath, and Nathaniel noticed that she was fighting against tears. "One day he lost control. He hit me so hard I thought I was going to die. He left me on the floor, bleeding, and said that if I didn't leave, he would kill me." Nathaniel felt a chill in his stomach. Madison closed her eyes for a moment before continuing. "That's how I got the scar on my back. He threw me against a glass table." Nathaniel felt his blood boil. He wanted to know that man's name. He wanted to find him, wanted to make him pay for everything, but instead he just stood up and went to her. Madison looked at him, surprised, as he knelt in front of her and held her hands. "You will never have to be afraid again," Nathaniel said, his voice low but firm. Madison's eyes filled with tears. "I've already been too afraid in my life, Nathaniel." He brought one of her hands to her face, wiping away a tear that was falling. "Not anymore." Madison closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them, she looked directly at him, and Nathaniel knew at that moment that he was completely lost. He not only wanted to protect Madison, he wanted to love her, but would she allow it? Nathaniel Anderson had never felt so helpless in his life. He was a businessman, someone used to solving problems with money, influence, and power, but in the presence of Madison Bailey, her pain and everything she had been through, he felt small. She was stronger than anyone he knew. She had survived abandonment, violence, and humiliation. She raised a child alone, not knowing what tomorrow held for her. And yet she could still smile. That night, after the conversation in the office, he stayed awake for hours, reflecting. He didn't just want to help her, he wanted to be with her. But what about Madison? Did she see something in him beyond a benefactor? He knew he couldn't force anything. Madison had suffered too much. If she ever felt anything for him, it had to be in her own time, and Nathaniel would wait. The relationship between them changed after that night. Madison seemed more comfortable around him. She talked more, laughed more. Even Daniel Mitchell seemed to notice the change as he began to babble sounds whenever Nathaniel entered the room, as if recognizing him as someone important. Nathaniel started to arrive at work earlier just to spend more time with them. He brought gifts for Daniel Mitchell, helped Madison in the kitchen, even though she insisted he didn't need to, and little by little, their closeness grew. But there was still a barrier. Madison never talked about feelings. She was affectionate. With Daniel, but with Nathaniel, she kept a certain distance, an invisible wall that he still couldn't break down, and this tormented him. One morning, Nathaniel decided to do something different. "Come on, I have a surprise for you," he said, grabbing the car keys. Madison, who was feeding Daniel Mitchell, frowned. "Surprise? Yes, you and Daniel need to get out of this house for a bit." Madison hesitated. "Nathaniel, I don't have suitable clothes to go to fancy places." He smiled. "Who said, 'We're going to a fancy place, just trust me'?" She looked at Daniel, who was already smiling at Nathaniel as if he agreed. "All right," she said finally. Shortly after, Nathaniel took them to a secluded park, away from the city's hustle and bustle. The place was beautiful, filled with trees and a sparkling lake reflecting the blue sky. Madison looked around, enchanted. "It's been years since I've been to a place like this," she said softly. Nathaniel spread a blanket on the grass and took out some snacks he had prepared. "So today is a day to enjoy." Madison sat down, holding Daniel in her lap, while Nathaniel observed every detail of her. The way the sun lit her hair, how she smiled at Daniel, flapping his little hands in the air. "You should do this more often," he said suddenly. Madison looked at him, confused. "Do what?" "Smile like that, you look even more beautiful." She blushed slightly and looked away. "You say that as if I don't smile. You smile, but it's not always real." Madison fell silent for a moment, staring at the lake's water. "I think I forgot what it's like to be happy without worrying about what comes next." Nathaniel felt a tightness in his chest. "You don't have to live like that anymore." She stared at him for a moment. Her eyes seemed to be searching for something in him. "I want to believe that, Nathaniel, but it's hard." "Then let me help you." She smiled, but there was a hidden sadness there. Nathaniel didn't insist. He knew that Madison carried deep traumas and that nothing would change overnight, but he was willing to wait. The outing to the park was a turning point. After that day, Madison seemed a little more open, closer to him. They started to talk more, sharing little stories about their lives. Nathaniel, who was once reserved about his own story, began to tell about his childhood, about his former babysitter Tamirez, the only person who really cared for him in childhood. "She was like a mother to me," Nathaniel said one night, while they were sitting on the porch. "She taught me a lot about life." Madison smiled. "She sounds like an amazing person." She was. "Do you miss her?" Nathaniel sighed. "Yes, but life taught me to move on." Madison fell silent for a moment before saying, "I understand." Nathaniel noticed that she was thinking about something, but before he could ask, she changed the subject. And that's when it happened. Madison touched his hand. It was a small gesture, but for Nathaniel, it meant everything. She had never done that before. He looked at her, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Madison held his gaze, and Nathaniel saw something different there. She didn't say anything, but in that instant he knew something had changed between them, and that perhaps she was finally ready to tear down the last barrier between them. That touch. So simple, yet so deep at the same time. Nathaniel felt a shiver run up his skin when Madison touched his hand. He did not pull away. On the contrary, he turned his palm up, allowing her fingers to fit into his. Madison hesitated, but did not withdraw her hand. It was the first time she broke the barrier between them. They looked at each other, and Nathaniel saw in her eyes something he had never seen before, something she was trying to hide, but which at that moment became clear. Fear. Not of Nathaniel, not of being there, but of feeling. She wanted to trust, but still doubted if she should, and Nathaniel did not want to rush her, so he just gently squeezed her hand and smiled. Madison returned the smile, shyly, and then, without saying anything, she let go of his hand and got up. "I'm going to bed," Nathaniel nodded. "Good night, Madison." She hesitated for a second at the door, as if she wanted to say something, but gave up. She just gave him one last look before leaving. Nathaniel stayed there, alone, feeling her touch still warm on his skin. He was in love, and for the first time in years, it scared him. In the following days, something had changed between them. Madison seemed more comfortable by his side. Sometimes he noticed her furtive glances, as if she were also trying to understand what she felt. And Nathaniel, he could no longer ignore it. He wanted Madison, not as a whim or a passing obsession. He truly wanted to be with her. He wanted to protect, care for, and make her smile every day. And gradually, he realized that she was also beginning to open up to him. Conversations became more intimate, eye contact more intense, touches, although discreet, more frequent. Until one night, everything changed completely. It was late. Daniel was already deeply asleep in the crib. Nathaniel and Madison were in the living room, watching a movie, but neither was really paying attention. The tension between them was palpable. Madison was by his side, her legs folded on the couch, hugging a pillow. Her hair fell gently over her shoulders, and Nathaniel couldn't stop looking at her, she noticed. "What's wrong?" she asked, a little shy. Nathaniel smiled slightly. "Nothing, just looking at you." She blushed, looking away, but she didn't pull back. A comfortable silence settled between them until Madison took a deep breath and looked him in the eye. "Nathaniel, yes?" She hesitated. Then, in a hesitant but meaningful gesture, she slid her hand to his and intertwined her fingers with his. Nathaniel felt his heart race. "Madison." But before he could finish the sentence, she leaned closer and rested her head on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but for Nathaniel it meant everything. She was choosing to trust him. He smiled, bringing his free hand to her hair, gently running his fingers through her soft strands. Madison closed her eyes, sighing as if that simple affection was something she hadn't felt in a long time. "I never thought I'd find a safe place," she whispered. Nathaniel squeezed her hand. "Now you have." Madison lifted her head and looked at him. Her eyes sparkled, and in that moment, Nathaniel knew it was her. He no longer wanted to deny it, no longer wanted to postpone it. Before he could think, before her fear spoke louder, Nathaniel brought one of his hands to Madison's face and gently caressed it. She didn't flinch. She just closed her eyes and tilted her head slightly towards his touch. Nathaniel's heart was pounding in his chest, and then, slowly, he leaned in. Madison opened her eyes. Their faces were so close that he could feel her breath. There was a moment of hesitation, but then she surrendered, and for the first time, Madison's lips touched Nathaniel's. It was a slow, careful kiss, as if they were both discovering something new, something precious. And to Nathaniel, that was exactly it. When they pulled away, Madison was still, with her eyes closed, her lips slightly parted, as if trying to absorb what had just happened. Nathaniel smiled. "I've been waiting for this longer than you can imagine." She opened her eyes, a small smile on her lips. "Me too." And in that moment, Nathaniel knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Madison was no longer just a woman he had helped. She was the woman he wanted forever. But fate still had a twist in store for them. A truth from the past was about to come to light, and when that happened, everything would change again. The kiss changed everything. Nathaniel Anderson felt this from the moment his lips touched Madison Bailey's. Something inside him broke, and another feeling was born in its place. Something stronger, deeper, more real than anything he had ever felt. Madison, however, seemed scared, not of him, but of herself. In the following days, she was different, more reserved, as if she were trying to process what happened between them. Nathaniel Anderson noticed and gave space. He didn't want to force her, but at the same time, he needed her to understand something. He wasn't going anywhere, and with each passing day, the tension between them only grew. Madison still looked at him as before, but now there was something more in her gaze. Desire, perhaps fear for sure, and Nathaniel knew she needed to feel safe before she could fully surrender. So he waited, but fate would not wait for them. Everything changed that afternoon. Nathaniel Anderson was in the mansion's office, handling some business, when his phone rang. He frowned upon seeing that it was an unknown number. "Hello? Nathaniel? This is Marina." Nathaniel's eyes widened upon recognizing the voice. Marina was a former employee of his family, someone who had worked for his parents when he was just a boy. More specifically, she was a close friend of his nanny, Tamires. "Marina?" he repeated, surprised. "Long time no see. How did you get my number?" "I got it from an old acquaintance of yours," she replied, her voice hesitant. Nathaniel felt a strange tightness in his chest. Is something wrong? There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Marina took a deep breath before speaking. "Nathaniel, I know this may sound strange, but I need to ask you something." "Sure, go ahead." "Have you met anyone named Madison Bailey recently?" Nathaniel's heart raced. "What? How do you know that?" "Because I need to tell you something that might change everything." Nathaniel felt a shiver run down his spine. "Marina, for God's sake, just tell me already." She hesitated, and then said the words that would change everything. "Madison is Tamires's daughter." Nathaniel was left speechless. The words seemed to echo in his mind, but he couldn't absorb what that meant. How is that possible?" "Hey," he managed to ask, his voice weak. "I know it's a shock, but it's true," Marina continued. "Tamires had a daughter before she passed away. I learned that the girl went through many difficulties after her mother's death. I've always wanted to find her, but I never knew where she went until I heard her name recently." Nathaniel felt the world spin. Madison was Tamire's daughter, the woman who raised him, who cared for him like a mother, and now he was in love with her daughter. "Nathaniel? Are you there?" He closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead, trying to organize his thoughts. "Yes, I'm here," he murmured. "What are you going to do with this information?" Nathaniel opened his eyes and stared into the void. He had no idea, but he knew this would change everything. Nathaniel spent hours thinking about what to do. His heart and mind were at war. He wanted Madison. That hadn't changed. But how could he continue to be with her now that he knew she was the daughter of the only woman who had treated him with love as a child? He needed to talk to Madison. That night, he found her on the porch, holding a cup of tea as she gazed at the stars. He took a deep breath before approaching. "We need to talk." Madison looked at him, noticing his serious expression. "What happened?" Nathaniel hesitated. How to say something like that? How to explain something he couldn't even process himself? But there was no other way. "Madison, I discovered something about you, about your mother." She frowned. "My mother?" Nathaniel nodded. "Her name was Tamires, right?" Madison's eyes widened. "How do you know this?" He took a deep breath. "Because she was my nanny when I was a child." The silence between them was absolute. Madison stared at him as if she were trying to understand his words. "What?" "I was raised by her until I was 10. Nathaniel continued. She was the only person who showed me affection, who truly cared for me. Madison covered her mouth. With her hands, her eyes brimming with tears. This can't be true, but it is. She turned away, running her hands through her hair, trying to process. You're saying that my mother, you knew her? That she took care of you? Yes. Madison turned back to him, and Nathaniel noticed the confusion and pain in her eyes. And why are you telling me this now? Nathaniel hesitated. Because I needed you to know the truth. Madison looked lost. Does this mean that all of this... us? She didn't finish the sentence. Nathaniel understood. She was trying to make sense of what she felt for him now that she knew the truth. And so was he. Madison remained silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. What does this mean for us? Nathaniel didn't know how to answer. But he knew he didn't want to lose her, so he just said the only thing he was sure about. It means that our story is more connected than we imagined. Madison looked at him, tears in her eyes. I need to think. I need to be alone for a while. Nathaniel's heart tightened, but he respected it. I understand. Madison walked past him and entered the house, leaving Nathaniel alone on the porch. And for the first time, he was afraid of losing her. Madison Bailey locked herself. In her room that night, she was in shock. Her heart was racing, her breathing was shallow, and her mind was spinning non-stop. Nathaniel Anderson, the man who took her in, who cared for her and for Daniel Mitchell, the man she was beginning to love. He was the same man who had been raised by her mother. How was that possible? Madison Bailey sat on the bed and brought her hands to her face. Fate seemed to be playing with her. Her whole life, she had searched for a home, for a place where she could feel safe. And when she finally found it, she discovered that her story was linked to his in a way she could never have imagined. She tried to remember her mother. The memories were vague, blurry. Madison Bailey was very young when Tamiris passed away. She never knew exactly how her mother lived before having her. She never had much information about her past. And now she had discovered that her mother had raised Nathaniel Anderson as if he were her own son. What did that mean for the two of them? She felt something strong for Nathaniel Anderson. From the first day, he treated her with respect, patience, and kindness. He was the first man who did not see her as a burden, who did not hurt her, who did not try to control her. And for the first time, she felt safe. But now, everything seemed uncertain. The next morning, Madison Bailey avoided Nathaniel Anderson. She didn't know what to say, how to act. Her heart wanted to run to him, feel his touch, continue from where they left off. But her mind screamed that it was wrong, that it was too complicated. She needed answers. So, she did the only thing she could do at that moment. She decided to leave the mansion, not to leave for good, but to look for someone who could tell her more about her mother. Madison Bailey thought of Marina, the woman who had told Nathaniel Anderson everything. He mentioned that she knew her mother. She was the one Madison Bailey needed to see. Without telling Nathaniel Anderson, she took Daniel Mitchell, packed a bag, and asked one of the staff to call her a taxi. Marina lived in a simple yet welcoming house. When she opened the door and saw Madison Bailey holding Daniel Mitchell in her arms, her eyes filled with emotion. "My God, you look so much like your mother," she said, bringing her hand to her mouth. Madison Bailey felt a pang in her chest. "I needed to see you. Nathaniel Anderson told me everything." Marina nodded and invited her in. They sat on the sofa in the small living room, and Madison Bailey went straight to the point. "What do you know about my mother?" Marina took a deep breath before she began to speak. "Tamiris was an amazing woman. Strong, hard-working. She worked for Nathaniel Anderson's family for years, and she loved that boy as if he were her own. Madison Bailey felt her eyes burning. And why did I never know that? Marina looked at her with pity. Your mother never had the chance to tell you. She died too soon, and you were just a child. Madison Bailey lowered her head. I always wanted to know more about her, but I never had anyone to tell me. Marina held her hand. Now you know. And no matter how strange it seems, fate brought you and Nathaniel Anderson back together. Madison Bailey took a deep breath. But what does that mean? I don't know what to do anymore. Marina smiled slightly. It means that your mother is still taking care of you. Madison Bailey fell silent, reflecting on those words. Her mother had left this world too soon, but somehow she brought her to Nathaniel Anderson. Madison Bailey felt a tear roll down her face. She knew what she needed to do. Madison Bailey returned to the mansion at the end of the afternoon. Her heart was racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was because she finally knew what she wanted. As she entered the house, Nathaniel Anderson was sitting on the sofa, a worried expression on his face. When he saw her, he immediately got up. Madison Bailey, where have you been? I was worried. She took a deep breath and approached him. I went to see Marina. Nathaniel Anderson frowned. Marina? I needed to know more about my mother. Nathaniel Anderson nodded, understanding. Madison Bailey held Daniel Mitchell with one hand and touched Nathaniel Anderson's hand with the other. I thought a lot, and now I know. Nathaniel Anderson looked at her, waiting. I want to be with you, she said, her voice firm. Nathaniel Anderson's eyes widened. Madison Bailey continued. You gave me everything I never had. Safety, affection, respect. But more than that, you made me feel like I finally have a home. Nathaniel Anderson felt his heart race. Madison Bailey. She squeezed his hand. I love you, Nathaniel Anderson. He closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing those words. When he opened them, he saw that Madison Bailey was completely surrendered to him. He didn't hesitate. He carefully took Daniel Mitchell from her arms, holding the baby as if he were his own. Then he pulled Madison Bailey to him and kissed her. It was a kiss different from the first. It was no longer a test. It was no longer fear dissolving. It was love, and this time Madison Bailey did not pull back. She knew that for the first time in her life she was where she truly belonged. But there was still one last step to take, and one last twist of fate awaited them. The kiss sealed something much greater than words could express. Nathaniel felt the warmth of Madison's lips, and the weight of all the emotions they had tried to suppress for so long. She was there in front of him, completely surrendered, for the first time without fear. Daniel, safe in Nathaniel's arms, let out a little giggle, as if approving of everything that was happening. Madison chuckled softly at the sight, and Nathaniel did too. It seems like he already accepts me as part of the family, Nathaniel joked, adjusting the baby in his arms. Madison smiled, and her eyes shone with an emotion he had never seen before. Because you are already part of it, Nathaniel. The following months were intense. Nathaniel and Madison fully embraced their relationship, and she began to feel increasingly secure by his side. It wasn't an easy process for Madison to trust completely, but Nathaniel was patient. He helped her rebuild her life, not just by offering a luxurious home, but above all, by being a true partner. He encouraged Madison to study, to seek a path of her own, to discover her dreams. I don't want you to depend on me forever, he said one time as she enrolled in a business course. But I want you to know that no matter what, I will always be here. Madison smiled, touched. Thank you for everything. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was becoming closer and closer to Daniel. The bond between them grew day by day. He taught him to take his first steps, to say his first words. And the boy's first word was, Daddy! Nathaniel felt a lump in his throat the moment he heard it. Madison, beside him, covered her mouth in surprise. "Did you hear that?" she asked, laughing between tears. Nathaniel picked up Daniel, feeling an emotion he had never experienced before. "Daddy?" he repeated, trying to confirm. The baby clapped and repeated, "Daddy!" Nathaniel looked at Madison, his eyes misty. "I love this boy as if he were mine from day one." Madison held his hand, "And he knows that." At that moment, Nathaniel knew he would never part from them. They were his family. Nathaniel knew that Madison still had traumas from the past, so he waited for the right moment to take the next step. And that moment came on a special night in the same garden where Madison had cried some time ago, thinking that her life would never change. Now it was the place where she was happiest. Nathaniel arranged a romantic dinner under the stars. Madison, who already knew he liked surprises, smiled at the sight of the table set with candles and flowers. "What are we celebrating?" she asked, laughing. Nathaniel took her hands, looking into her eyes. "Our story." Madison blinked, surprised. "Nathaniel." He knelt down. Madison brought her hands to her face, completely stunned. Nathaniel took a little box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a delicate, sophisticated ring. "Madison, I never knew what it truly meant to live until you appeared. I never understood what true love was until you taught me." She was already crying. "You gave me something that money could never buy. You gave me a family." Madison sobbed, smiling. "Will you marry me?" She nodded vigorously, even before she could speak. "Yes, yes, Nathaniel." He smiled, placed the ring on her finger and stood up, pulling her in for a passionate kiss. Daniel, sitting in his chair nearby, clapped excitedly. That moment was theirs, and they would never forget it. A few years later, Nathaniel and Madison's lives completely changed after the wedding. Madison became an independent woman, helping Nathaniel with the business and starting her own career. But most importantly, she was happy. For the first time in her life, she felt that she belonged somewhere. Daniel grew up strong and healthy, proudly calling Nathaniel Dad. And then, one day, came another surprise. Madison discovered she was pregnant. Nathaniel was in shock upon hearing the news, holding her by the shoulders, his heart racing. You are serious?" She laughed, nodding. "Yes, we are going to have a baby." Nathaniel ran his hand through his hair, laughing and crying. At the same time, "I can't believe it," he hugged her tightly, kissing her multiple times. Daniel, now a clever little boy, looked at the two and asked, "Daddy, Mommy, am I going to have a little brother?" Madison and Nathaniel laughed together. "Yes, my love," Madison replied, picking him up. Nathaniel smiled. "And we already know his name." Madison nodded, her eyes shining. They decided to name their daughter Tamires in honor of the woman who somehow brought them together. A few years later, Nathaniel, Madison, Daniel, and little Tamires were gathered in the garden of the mansion, the very same place where it all began. Madison held the daughter in her arms, while Daniel ran around the lawn, laughing. Nathaniel observed that scene and felt a tightness in his chest, not of sadness, but of gratitude. He remembered the rainy night he first met Madison. Had he known at that moment that that woman and that baby would become his reason for living, he would have stopped the car even faster. Nathaniel held Madison by the waist and pulled her close. "You are the best gift life has given me," he whispered. Madison smiled, "And you saved mine." They kissed while Daniel shouted excitedly, "Yuck! Daddy and Mommy are kissing again." Nathaniel and Madison laughed together. The past had been difficult, but the present was perfect, and the future would be even better, because after all, they were a family, and they always would be. Did you like this touching story? If this ending touched your heart, leave your comment below. We want to know your opinion. Don't forget to like and share this story with someone special. And to follow more moving stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Together we can spread more love and hope.